Hello and welcome to the VDA's Labor and Employment Question and Answer period. We know that this has been an unbelievably challenging time for all Virginians and for our dentist members, with the recommendation of over a week ago coming from the VDA to postpone all non-emergency care, and then from the ADA. We continue to work with the federal government and the Virginia state government to try to best keep them informed as to how well our members are doing their part to lessen the curve and to put things in a priority for our membership. So with that, the VDA continues to try to deliver resources and access to questions that are coming in fast and furious, as there is no roadmap. This is uncharted waters for us. But we continue to try to offer our members the answers to the questions. And today is a big part of those questions that we've been getting on labor and employment. Our dentists know that they care about their employees. We know that they want to do right by them. And we've had a lot of questions. And so we've decided to go ahead and acquire outside counsel with one of the top labor and employment firms in Virginia. We have lucky enough to have two of them joining us today, and we have compiled some questions that we are happy to pass along to them, get some answers, hopefully give you some guidance, and then we'll also have some exciting new things to announce going forward related to these labor and employment questions, how we can help better serve you and get you the answers that you need, and also continuously updating our hub, the COVID-19 hub that we have on the VDA website, which has been hopefully, everybody's been finding it helpful and useful. And we're excited to have with us today from the O'Hagan Meyer law team, Charlie Meyer and Joan McKenna. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Ryan. We appreciate the opportunity to be with your members and to address a number of questions that your team has with respect to the impact of the new federal legislation, which goes into effect on April 2nd. It's called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, kind of widely known as Families First Act, as well as some of the other new legislation and regulations surrounding the coronavirus pandemic, and how you all as employers can manage that in the workplace. More recently, you've all been notified about our governor's order with additional restrictions. It goes into effect tonight, Tuesday, March 24 at midnight. So we want to be responsive to how that may impact your workplace as well. So with that, there are additional acts that have been in place for quite some time for employers, which are going to be implicated by COVID-19 or the coronavirus. We'll talk about those. But we understand there are a number of specific questions that your members have, and so we're really going to be addressing those. And if you all have additional questions beyond those that we're addressing today, Ryan and the leadership team at VDA will be, if they haven't already, circulating our information so you can contact us and reach out to us. And I understand, Ryan, you're going to explain a little bit more about that at the end.
Absolutely. And we have been circulating a lot of the great content you've been able to share with us about the first two rounds of things going on in Congress, and then also what the governor has been able to share with us here in Virginia. And for example, his removing the 1 week on unemployment insurance claims was, something y'all put out, and we helped educate folks about that. All of that is being held at our hub, the COVID-19 hub on the front page of the VDA website. We've got it broken down by different topics and issues that I think everybody will take notice of. Obviously, business, labor, employment. There's the actual scientific things on there as well, but we just recently have added opportunities to donate PPE to places where they are collecting and need them. More information to come there. So yes, it's been extremely helpful, and thank you all for rapidly putting those responses together, because things have been happening at a rapid rate, and the questions are only growing as we see more help coming our way. But So first question, I'll go ahead and address this one to Joan and see. One of the questions we've been getting from members is, what is the best way to have my employees be covered for pay, PTO, and unemployment? So if I need to let go of some staff, will they be eligible for unemployment benefits? What if I furlough? Would they still be? And a whole myriad of things, but we've talked about kind of what most dental offices look like. And y'all know as well from your other dental clients. And if you wouldn't mind just kind of walking through some of the options related to that.
Certainly. And I understand that certainly many of our employers that are clients that have been contacting us they're in a tough position in that they want to minimize the harm to their employees as much as they can while recognizing they're in a very difficult business position. So essentially, the options that are available under the current circumstances with dental offices closed except for emergencies are that, primarily what folks are, I believe the employers as a rule have been using PTO at this time, but they're also quickly moving to layoff or furlough. Charlie's going to explain a little bit later in this presentation the nuances between layoff and furlough, but either one of those options where you are basically telling your employees, we cannot employ you at this time, we don't have the work, we need to let you loose, at least for a time being, those employees will immediately be eligible for unemployment. If they're allowed to use their PTO prior to taking the furloughs or leaves, to being put officially on furlough or leave, then they can take advantage of their PTO should you use to do that. I think it's a legitimate choice either way to let them use out their PTO and then cut them loose, or if you need to go ahead and implement a furlough or layoff at this time, allow them to come back with the hopes that they will be reinstated when you guys get hit by the no doubt avalanche of work you're going to have when we finally pass the peak of all of this, then allow them to have their PTO available to them at that time. But basically, we believe that probably allowing people to go into the use unemployment claims at this time is the best practice, especially in light of the fact that there is this new mandate beginning April 2nd of paid sick leave for individuals that are actively employed by you. So essentially, we are recommending furlough or layoff. And again, Charlie's going to explain that next. But that a furlough indicates to the employees that you intend and want to bring them back and are giving them some cushion. Layoff means your job is over at this time. We'd love to bring you back, but you're on your own for now until this clears up. And either of those circumstances, they're eligible for unemployment.
Yeah, I would just, Ryan, anticipating the next question, which is, okay, what's the difference between a furlough and a layoff?
Absolutely.
And by the way, for your audience, Joan and I are 7 feet apart. It's very important, and I'm kind of not making light of the social distancing. It's super important that we do that in our workplace and telework. We're the only 2 people in our office, as we know today. There might be one other admin person, but we're really trying to make sure that we're all teleworking and maintaining social distancing if you are keeping your offices open, particularly in compliance with, I understand, the ADA's pronouncement that you continue to provide services for emergency care, emergency procedures. But flipping back to the question about, okay, well, which should I do? Thanks, Charlie and Joan. You kind of laid out 2 options, furlough or layoff. So here's some differences, here's some similarities. A furlough is a temporary leave of absence, but they're still your employee. It means you can set a date certain for them to come back, but you don't have to. It means that they're still getting health insurance and other benefits as your employee, but they're just getting no pay for the duration of the furlough. There are a lot of advantages to the furlough over the layoff or termination, because a furlough is not a termination. One advantage is you've got your workforce in place already. And if you would not otherwise be terminating that employee, The furloughed employee comes back whenever you're operational, whenever you've got patients that you're able to see outside of an emergency procedure basis. That's a huge advantage. You're not searching for someone, you haven't fired someone, you haven't ruptured the employment relationship that way, and you can provide the health benefits. So that's important. There's one caveat with that, and that is your health insurance provider may dictate, as a term of continued coverage, that you have to have worked a certain number of hours a week. So you have to talk to your broker, your health insurer, to determine, is there a minimum hourly threshold that is necessary to maintain continued health coverage? A number of policies don't have that. And so the benefit of the furlough is you keep your folks with their health insurance and their benefits, and then you just suspend their actual work time until such time as you're operational again. Here's one way in which they're similar, and that is whether it's a furlough or a layoff, unemployment is available. So if you furlough an employee right now and you say, okay, look, we're just not operating other than possible emergency procedures, then that individual has the opportunity to go get unemployment through the Virginia Employment Commission. It's a very easy process. It's all online. They've got a very helpful FAQ if you go to their website, the VEC, the Virginia Employment Commission. And it lays out, here's what you can get. You can get between 12 and 26 weeks. 26 weeks is 6 months of unemployment benefits, whether you're furloughed or whether you're unemployed because you've been laid off. And there's a range also in terms of the amount. It's a low on the low end, $60 a week. On the high end, the max right now is $378 a week. So that's a very real help for your workforce if you want to furlough, keep them employed, provide them the benefits, but make sure that they're drawing unemployment in the meantime until such time as you ramp back up and are operational and bring them back in at their prior rate of pay.
Thank you for that. That's been one of the real hot topic questions, and it's top on everyone's mind. Of everybody wants to do right by their team and do what's best for them in this hard situation, and but also having to balance that with the actual practice and its future. So in relation to that, if you furlough staff, and a lot of dental offices have irregular hours, whether it be a Monday through Thursday or a 4-day week, whatever it might be for that staff person, when do they, how would it be managed when they need to come back in for an emergency care? If you furloughed them, how could they, and how would it work if it could, for that person to be able to come in for spotty hours here and there, one day a week or whatever it is, or reduced hours?
What we're recommending, we're getting this question a lot, of course, because people do, our employers, clients do think they may have some need to employ their workers. Generally, the best practice with a furlough situation is to not use the employee at all. However, what we are recommending, and the reason for that is we don't want the employee to have an argument that, hey, they said I'm furloughed, I make $50,000 a year, they're actually still using me, they still owe me my full salary. So, to protect you down the road is why the advice is given generally to not use employees who are on furlough. However, what we're recommending to get around that is that you issue a clear communication for the staff that you may need to use on occasion for emergency procedures, that in the furlough notice that you give to them, say this full-time position at this time is suspended. We are no longer using you in that fashion. What we would like to do during this furlough period, in lieu of that prior position, which cannot exist at this time, is to employ you on an hourly basis or a temporary basis at X number of hours per week as needed at X amount of pay. And what that should do is accomplish a replacement that they understand, and the VEC understands, and you understand, that you have a new relationship with this employee that is extremely limited. if your employees have goodwill toward you, then they're going to want to help you out as well. So it should be beneficial on both sides for you to be able to do that. We just want to make sure you don't get any trouble of considering to be abusing the furlough concept. So we think that's fully acceptable. We just recommend that your members document what they're going to do with these people. And we understand they may not exactly know how many emergency procedures. They can give a range. It doesn't have to be precise. The point is to document that your entitlement to the annual salary or hourly, weekly wages that you had before this furlough is gone. This is a new day for now. And we hope one day to get us back to where we were. But at this time, everyone's on an emergency basis, and this is a new position.
Yeah, and I would just supplement what Joan shared, and that is the point is clarity. So you put the employee, you've either laid them off or you've gone the furlough option, which we're recommending as the better of the two options if you intend to bring that person back at the end of this pandemic when you're more fully operational. And so then the issue is, okay, clarity in what the role is going forward. You've been furloughed. However, for emergency procedures, we will need to call upon you. And so you are now considered a part-time, hourly, or temporary employee. And the benefit of doing that, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy or a memorandum, it can be in an email going forward. Just be clear in the communication of the employee. We will need to work with you and call upon you for emergency procedures, which we will pay you at your regular rate of pay on an hourly as needed basis. We're estimating this could be one or more procedures a week. We want to provide as much information as is feasible based upon your past practice. How many times did you have emergency procedures in the past? Was it once a week on average, twice a week on average? And that way they can help gauge how many hours a week they'll be needed to come in. And where that's helpful is it goes back to the issue of unemployment. They're drawing unemployment. And then as you pay them for the hourly temp services for those emergency procedures as needed, then that is an offset against their unemployment. And they have to report that to the VEC. So if they were otherwise drawing $368 a week, but you're going to pay them $100 a week, they have to report that to the VEC because it impacts the amount they get. So the whole idea is it's compassionate, it's caring for your employees, but it's also making sure you're operational and meeting the needs of your patients and customers, providing that service.
That's great. And that's been one of the bigger, I think, things to juggle, because dental practices do have some different hours and different structures around a typical workday for a lot of staff. So appreciate that sound advice, and I'm sure we'll be able to advise a whole lot more folks with that information. So thank you very much. We had a lot of questions come in about paying sick leave and the 2 additional hours they're hearing about. There's a lot of confusion around the Families First Coronavirus Response Act and what it means with the 2 additional weeks of sick leave. Do I have to pay that if I've already had sick leave? So Charlie, would you mind just offering some clarity around what the 2 additional hours are and who it applies to, and who should be worried about it and who shouldn't?
Sure. And to be clear, it's 2 additional weeks of paid leave for the paid sick leave part. And then there's a second part, which is actually an amendment to what's called the Family Medical Leave Act. And it's the public health emergency provision under this Family First Response Act. So let me break it down first, the statute, just very clearly so everyone has an understanding. And then we could talk about, well, which comes first? Our own paid PTO, paid leave, the federal legislation, this Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or unemployment, okay? So first, the act, let's talk about it. There are 2 parts of this act, which was passed on March 18. It goes into effect April 2nd. So that's 8 days from now. And that's an important deadline we want to keep in mind with respect to some of these layoff and or furlough decisions. So the act itself provides for 2 weeks paid leave for certain circumstances surrounding the coronavirus. And it lays forth what those are. First, if you're quarantined because of COVID-19. And what does that mean? Well, it means you're quarantined because the doctor's told you you're quarantined. You're quarantined because your employer has told you you're quarantined, or your governor or federal government. So there's no case out yet. This isn't even effective. So there's very little guidance in terms of what quarantine means, other than those obvious points. If it's a government mandated quarantine at the local, state, or federal level, or if it's an employer dictated because of the safety of our patients. So we have some guidance, obviously, from the ADA with respect to doing emergency procedures, but not other procedures. And then, of course, there's the quarantine that comes from your healthcare provider saying you need to be quarantined. So if you're quarantined, if you're seeking care and anticipate being self-quarantined because you may have symptoms of COVID-19, those are categories which would entitle you to the paid leave portion, that 2-week portion of the Families First Response Act. There's another category, which is caring for a child or a family member who has been diagnosed. And then you have 2 other categories in the law, which involves caring for a child or individual in your family under the age of 18 who cannot go to school because school is closed because they've been quarantined. So they're at home, and there's a mandated school closure, which Jeff is going into effect immediately because with Governor Northam's order. So you've got school-age children at home. What does the Act do for that? So the Act provides up to 12 weeks, and this is the family leave portion of the Act. And that is up to 12 weeks at 2/3 of your rate of pay, not to exceed $200 a day. So for the first 2 weeks, it would be $200 a day, 10 working days, that's 2 weeks. That's a max of $2,000 that you'd have to pay for the first 2 weeks. If it goes beyond that, and it is, the entire semester is closed here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, it's a max of 12 weeks. Again, at that $200 an hour, $200 a day max, or 2/3 the rate of pay. So the difference between the paid leave portion for yourself being sick or quarantined is that caps out at 2 weeks at your full rate of pay, not to exceed $511. So the most that any one of you in your practice would have to pay an employee for 2 weeks for being out because of they're personally quarantined or they're symptomatic or they have COVID-19 would be $5,110. 2 weeks, 10 days, 10 working days at $511 a day, okay? Full stop. That's the first part. That's the paid sick leave part. Then the child care leave part is that in addition to that, either 10 weeks, or if you don't have the paid leave, a total of 12 weeks at 2/3 rate of pay, $200 a day to care for your child. That's the way the Act is structured, okay? So now, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it your own generous vacation pay, your PTO, your sick leave policy that you've implemented with your own practice for your employees? Is it this federal new Family First Act, or is it unemployment? Here it is. It's the Family First Act first. They get 2 weeks paid leave. If they're on your payroll, they're your employees, and as of April 2nd, you must provide that 2-week paid leave. If they're quarantined, because they can't come into work otherwise unless it's an emergency procedure, or they've got the symptoms themselves, or if in fact they need to be out to care for a child, they get that 2/3 rate of pay for that first 2 weeks. That comes first. Then after that, you should really think about exhausting whatever available PTO, vacation, sick leave is there before you address the unemployment. And that way they're using up the available PTO at their full rate of pay. That's better for them. It's good for them. It's good for you. It's a policy you've got in place. But that's in addition to the 2-week family leave, the Family First paid leave provision that the feds just passed on March 18, which is effective April 2nd. That's a long answer, Ryan, but one of the important takeaways is April 2nd. What do you want to do before the law becomes effective? Because if your plan is, this has been a challenging employment relationship with this particular employee, it's time to sever the relationship, then it's important that you go ahead and make that decision before April 2nd, because otherwise you are on the hook. If they're still your employee as of April 2nd, you're going to be paying paid leave. Same thing with furlough. Now, furlough, arguably, because they're still your employee, you're going to have to pay that 2 weeks under the Family First Act regardless, because they're still your employee. They're just not getting any working hours. Okay? I don't know if Joan has anything else.
No, and just to clarify that the paid time, if you've given them 2 weeks of paid sick time prior to April 2nd, it does not count, unfortunately. You know, we've gotten that question a lot. Can I just use that as the emergency leave? And unfortunately, no, they have an additional entitlement beginning on April 2nd to the 2 weeks of emergency paid sick leave.
But I will say this, if you've given 2 weeks paid sick leave before the April 2nd deadline becomes effective, that goes with your with your existing sick leave policies as an employer. So you can apply whatever PTO or sick leave time that your employee would receive for that pre-April 2nd absence due to sickness.
Something I think we've heard from folks is how are the practices or the businesses, what is put in place for those that, you know, are there tax credits? Are there payroll tax credits? What advantages are set up to essentially make some of these businesses and these practices, small businesses, whole after this is all done?
Yeah, let me tackle that one first, because it's very important to know from a cash flow standpoint, this paid leave under the Family First Act should not adversely impact you to the extent you owe payroll taxes in excess of the amount that you're paying your employees. The way it works, it's 100% tax credit. So if, for example, we'll give you this hypothetical, you have to pay $5,000 to your hygienist, Mary, and that's for that 2 week period of paid leave. And you owe $8,000 in payroll tax for Mary for 2019 or just going forward. You don't pay it. It's not an issue of, oh, I'm going to pay it, and then I have to fill out all sorts of forms and wait months for the federal government to reimburse me. It's no, you take the tax credit, you fill out the form. I paid this 2 week payment under the Family First Act for my hygienist or for my employee. I'm not paying taxes for the payroll tax, which is the FICA, the Medicare, the Medicaid, the employer's portion, the employee's portion. I'm not going to pay it, and then you get that offset from your taxes. So if you paid Mary $5,000 for the paid leave under the new federal legislation, if you owed $8,000 in payroll taxes, you're only paying $3,000. So that's a meaningful help for employers. It just reduces your tax burden so that you can be complying with the 2 week paid leave. If, however, say you only owed $4,000 in payroll taxes and you're paying your employee $5,000, then you can apply not to pay taxes the next year. You get an advance credit for 2020, for your 2020, 2021 taxes. So it rolls forward depending on what your tax burden is. There's also a provision, Ryan, where if you've had any outlay of medical expenses or health insurance, say there's a copay from the employer that you're contributing to the employee's premium, that's reimbursable as well for that 2 week period, whatever you're paying during that 2 weeks out of pocket.
That's fantastic. Thank you. That's a lot of clarity around that issue, which we've had a whole mess of questions about. Real quickly, and one last question kind of related to what's going on the federal level, Congress. It's kind of hard to keep up with the 3 rounds, and hopefully by the end of the day today, on Tuesday, we might have, the Senate may have come to some kind of agreement, and then we can really start to dive into it. But does the legislation that's passed or will pass, is it clear that it impacts dental practices? So one of the questions we've had is, the VDA and the ADA made the recommendation, right, for folks to postpone all care non-emergency. Certainly feel like it was the right thing to do. The leadership wanted to go this route, and we were just about a day ahead of the curve anyway, from folks all across the country doing it. But as of today, there is no mandate from the federal government or the state government that dental offices have to be closed. We're doing this as a recommendation. There's been some concern, and we're hoping that more people heed the recommendation to only do non-emergency, to do our part in getting, the sooner we can do this, hopefully the sooner we can get back to normal, if there is a new normal. But everything under that act would apply to those who are, in some essence, voluntarily, by their own accord, closing before there was any strong language from the governor, or before any of that. Does that make sense? I mean, that's some of the concerns that I've heard from people.
Yeah, and Charlie and I have talked about that in terms of the definition of a quarantine. The federal legislation addresses situations where an employee cannot perform their work either in the office or telework due to a quarantine. So does a recommendation from the ADA that everything be shut down for 2 weeks, does that constitute a quarantine? I think you could make the argument that it does. I think you could probably also make the argument that it doesn't. Unfortunately, again, it's one of those things that we are waiting for additional guidance from the Department of Labor on. I think the safe thing to assume is that this does qualify as a quarantine, because it is obviously COVID-19 related, as part of the general, our general government and societal efforts to stem the spread of it. That's the advice we are giving.
Yeah, I think there are two things going on, Ryan. So the statutes themselves, they don't address dentists. They don't say, okay, you must close, you can't operate. They don't. So to be clear, the Family First Response Act does not say you must close or you can't do certain procedures. It's silent on that point. To be clear with respect to Governor Northam's order, which goes into effect tonight at midnight, it also doesn't prohibit dental practices from operating. That's very important. In fact, it notes that there are certain essential businesses that should remain open, and it includes healthcare providers. So arguably, certainly for emergency procedures, your members are entitled to remain open to provide those emergency services and care as a healthcare provider. Where the restrictions really kick in on the state level with Governor Northam's order has to do more with non-essential services, non-essential businesses. For example, what he carved out with respect to non-essential retail, with a limit, you can only have 10 people in your store, no more than 10, and social distancing and hygiene practices and such. So he's been very clear about shutting down those businesses that can't maintain that at all. And he's identified some, hair salons and barbershops and massage parlors and such. But there's been no such specificity with respect to dental practices. But I do think with respect to the quarantine issue and exercising care for the safety of your employees and your patients, you can make the argument that, look, this is a form of employer-imposed quarantine for all but essential emergency services. And that's appropriate. So if any employer can self-quarantine or impose those additional restrictions on their workforce because they know best what is safe practice. And kind of stepping back a little bit outside of what the statutes say or don't say, because they're silent. Governor Northam's order is silent as to dental practices. But there's best practices. And what is that governed by? That's the standard of care in your industry. And so from that standpoint, I think being very careful to follow the recommendations of the ADA and your own assessment of what is best care, best practice is important. Because think it through. Say a patient comes in and says, well, this was an emergency, but they were open and they just filled a cavity or took out a cavity, or they gave me a filling, or they cleaned my teeth. And there was nothing particularly emergent care related about that service. And then I think I got COVID-19 because of an encounter with my dentist or my hygienist at that practice, and now I'm going to sue. I mean, that's the next wave of what we're dealing with. So there's the statutory element, but then there's the plain old people going to court down the road trying to blame someone because of contracting COVID-19. And so that's another important reason. If your industry standard of care is, let's limit for now what we're doing to emergency care, that's important to follow. And so we're not recommending disregard that and just open your doors. We are recommending follow your best practices as set forth by your own industry.
Well, thank you very much. That's some good insight as well. We've had a lot of questions about the relationship of the recommendation versus a executive order, or like you said, it is not mentioned directly in there, so it leaves some people feeling uneasy. So we wanted to, and we've had a lot of questions about that. So thank you for that question. So moving on to away from what Congress is up to, and we'll probably be coming back to that once we have a bill. But what is the difference between an exempt and non-exempt employee? And is there a difference in how I handle those different types of employees?
Yes. The short answer is yes. So the difference between, in the common understanding, people tend to think of salaried employees as exempt and hourly paid employees as non-exempt. That is an overgeneralization. What the Fair Labor Standards Act does, which is this federal statute that mandates minimum wage and overtime premiums to be paid for hours over 40, what that does is carve out an exemption for certain what they consider to be exempt classifications of jobs. The ones that most of us are familiar with are what we call the white collar exemptions. That's administrative, professional, and executive employees. But there are also many other random exemptions that are identified in the statute. For purposes of dental practices, generally, the exempt employees are going to be your individuals, other than the professional physicians, so your doctors, dentists rather, are going to be the individuals who exercise a significant amount of independent judgment and discretion in doing their job. So if you have a business manager who is making big decisions based on your budget, how to spend your money, how to allocate the business's money, that may be an exempt employee. Each exempt and non-exempt is a classification that we generally need to do on a case-by-case basis. It's very fact-specific. But so I'm going to assume for the rest of this answer that the majority of employees in a dental practice are non-exempt and are paid by the hour. If that is incorrect, correct me. But the difference between an exempt employee and a non-exempt employee, one of the differences is, by definition, an exempt employee must be paid on a salaried basis. And what a salaried basis means is that you are given a set amount of pay per week to cover everything you do or nothing that you do. It's regardless of the quantity or quality of work performed, you get X number of dollars a week. That's what an exempt employee is. And the point being that the level of skill involved in doing one of these exempt jobs is not akin to an hour per hour. We're paying you for 1 hour of labor. You're getting paid for a lot more is expected of you. And so we have this different level of pay whereby it's a weekly amount. So what we deal with a lot in our world is maintaining the exemption, because the reason the exemption is important is because the employer is exempt from having to pay time and a half for hours worked over 40. For many of us, including attorneys and dentists, I'm sure if you if you had to pay us by the hour at a premium for hours worked over 40 in a work week, that could be quite expensive. So what is important to keep in mind with respect to reducing the hours of an exempt versus a non-exempt employee is that you may pay a non-exempt employee on an hour for hour basis. You can't do that with an exempt employee without jeopardizing their exempt status, which harkens back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of if you must furlough an employee who is an exempt employee who has up till this point been earning X number of dollars a week, or basically a flat sum in every 2-week pay period that is based on whether they work 20 hours or 60 hours, they get the same amount. You must clarify for them that position is changing and that you are going to be paying them on an hourly basis at this time. That is not dangerous as far as we're concerned to the exemption, because we're hoping certainly that your emergency needs will not exceed 40 hours in a week. And you can have these alternate positions during a time of economic duress. You just have to paper it correctly. So, you've got more flexibility with respect to your hourly employees and adjusting their hours. But that is I hope that's responsive to the exempt versus non-exempt.
And I would say, Ryan, just to follow up with what Joan shared, and that is you can do this with an exempt employee. So say you have an office manager who's exempt and making $50,000 a year, some amount in excess of the salary threshold, which is only $35,000, some change, a little bit north of $35,000 a year to meet the salary basis test for exemption. Okay, so you can do that, but to Joan's point, you have to be clear that because of this, we're furloughing you. We're going to take you out of exempt status, bring you back 2 hours a week, 5 hours a week at this rate of pay. You're no longer exempt. You're doing a part-time hourly employment with us. So because they've now gone underneath the threshold for the salary basis test for exemption, you can do that. Here's the one issue though, if you decide, well, I'm going to exempt I'm going to furlough my exempt employees and then just have them come in 1 hour a week to check in. But I'm still going to, say you're furloughed. The moment you do that and bring them in, if they work any portion of the week, they get the full week's salary. Okay. So that's why with exempt employees, you have to be particularly careful. Just don't come in at all, or we're going to reconstitute your job. We're going to create a new non-exempt part-time hourly position for you. You just have to be clear, and you can do that.
And so could an employer, and a question we've had a couple times has been, can I negotiate with an exempt / salaried in this scenario employee to become a non-exempt hourly worker?
Yes.
Okay.
You can do that. Yeah, as long as it's clear, you're no longer salaried. We're paying you in an hour. This is a new position. You've gone from being the salaried office manager or administrator for the practice or whatever the exact position may be, to we're now employing you as a part-time, temporary, 5 hours a week position for the duration of the furlough. And that's what we're doing. You're not going to draw your salary.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Another thing too, Ryan, if you have more than one exempt employee, you can do this as well, which is, hey, we're not worried about going so low under the salary basis test as to lose the exemption. But we are going to agree in this time, we're all going to take a haircut. We're all going to reduce our pay 10%, 20%. You'll still be exempt. You're still going to draw a salary, but instead of drawing a $60,000 a year salary, whatever that comes to biweekly, we're all going to agree, let's be at $45,000 together. We're all taking that same percentage pay cut. You can do that.
And that can last for a certain period of time, and then
it can last in perpetuity. You can say, unless you have an employment agreement, all right? So be very careful. If you've entered into employment agreements with your folks, you need to follow the employment agreement, and then you either terminate the employment agreement because of the nature of what's happened and you're furloughing, and we're allowed to do it, but we want to look at that employment agreement first. You don't want to be sued for breach of contract. But in the absence of an employment agreement, and that can be navigated too, just have to look at it. Otherwise, most people don't have employment agreements, and you would just then say, here's what we're doing because you're at will. And so we want to continue to provide you a salary to provide for yourself and your family, but here's what we can do at this time. We're not going to furlough you. You're still on duty. You're on call. You're an exempt salaried employee, but we're going to reduce your salary from X to 80% of X. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you very much. On that note, in the exempt, part-time, full-time, exempt, non-exempt, we have had a couple questions related to those that are paid on different fee structures or based on a commission structure. How do you recommend folks handle their staff that are heavy portion commission, partial commission, or some other structured fee outside of the normal hourly or salaried?
Well, it would depend on whether, I mean, if they're going to cut them loose, then it's a non-issue, right? I assume your question is how to manipulate that or how to alter that so that it recognizes the hardship of the business while still compensating them in the same sort of a manner.
Right. I mean, I think the questions have come that I have someone who's paid on a heavily or totally on a commission basis, and I want to do right by them. What are my options, I guess? And do they qualify for unemployment when it's based on something that fluctuates in commission?
Yeah, they definitely qualify for unemployment. And if the fact that if they're commission based and your work has dried up, essentially, that would be the basis for their commissions. It seems to me as though really the humane thing would be to furlough them or put them on to lay them off so that they can receive unemployment. Because I don't know how you would, for example, under the emergency paid leave, if they're still employed with you, then we're going to have to figure out how to calculate the emergency sick leave they're entitled to, regardless of the fact that they've been paid on a fee or commission basis. But I would think similarly, fee paid individuals, for example, if you have a professional that comes in your office and gets X dollars for each procedure, for this kind of procedure, X dollars for another kind of procedure, it's the same problem that you're facing in that the work is dried up. So how do you compensate them? And I think we go back to the furlough or layoff scenario. If you need them, I mean, in a way, it's easier for a fee-based person for you to reduce their work because if you don't have those procedures anymore, you don't have to pay them. It's just, presumably you want them to get some sort of replacement pay so that they can eat and pay their mortgage while they're on furlough or on layoff. So the other thing I suppose you could do, depending on the nature of the work, if it's work that you still need to be performed, so if it's not a dental procedure but some other work in the office, such as billing codes or something, I don't know, that you still need them to do but at a much lower capacity, then you could basically renegotiate the basis on which they're paid. But again, that is going to depend upon what resources the practice has to do so.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it raises a point which we didn't cover earlier, Ryan, and that is, how do you calculate what the 2-week pay should be under the Family First Coronavirus Response Act? So say you've got to pay that. We're still employing these folks, or they're furloughed as of April 2nd. We're not terminating, we're not laying off, we're just going to furlough. So we've got to figure out, how do we pay these folks? So the commission-based people, just like anyone else, you look back in time. We're supposed to look back, I think it's 6 months, and you find out what's the average amount they worked a week. And you then calculate it that way. If they were working full-time, don't take a vacation week and kind of cut it, but their average work week, what does that look like? What were they making? And that's important for two reasons. One, it's important to know, make sure you're doing it the right way under the federal legislation for the paid leave for that 2-week period when you furlough the commissioned salesperson, the commissioned employee, or the otherwise hourly employee. And second, it's important to understand for unemployment for them. So when they draw unemployment, they're saying, well, here's what it was. Here's what I was making beforehand. Now I'm coming in on a reduced hourly capacity, 2 hours a week. I'm not making the same commissions I was making before. And then that's what they take to go when they apply for unemployment with the Virginia Employment Commission.
That's great. Thank you. You know, we've heard a few, I think we touched on this a little earlier about the 4-day work week and whether the 4-day work week would affect employees and their unemployment as it relates to the 80-hour rule. Just quickly wanted to, because I know we have a lot of practices that employ some folks on a 4-day-a-week basis. So does that, and what would change related to that?
So with respect to unemployment, it doesn't change anything. What they look at is the amount. So what were you making on your average week? And your week could be defined as 3 days of 12-hour shifts, or 4 days of 10-hour shifts, or 5 days of 8-hour shifts, or any other permutation. Whatever works for your practice, whatever you've in fact been doing, that's what they'll look at in terms of determining unemployment. That's what, the federal government now expects us when we do that paid leave for 2 weeks. What was it on average that they were making? They don't really care so much, but for 2 weeks, it's 80 hours total for the federal portion, for the Families First. So to get to 80 hours, that's 2.5 weeks. It's whatever that is in that 80-hour window. For unemployment, it's a little bit different, and that is, what is it per week? What's your average weekly wage? And that's what's the basis for the amount of unemployment, which is going to range between $60 on the low end of unemployment per week to $378 on the high end. That's the max that you could get for that either 12 to 26 week period of unemployment. So you have to kind of look, what's the average, what were they making on an average week for unemployment? No matter how that week is defined, by hours, by days, by groupings of hours or days, it doesn't matter for unemployment. For the Family First Act, it does matter, it just has to be 80 hours. What were they making for 80 hours? You go back 6 months, look at the typical 80-hour period. So it's 2 weeks in a row is what they're striving for, and figure out what were they making. That's what you're supposed to be paying for 2 weeks. And then that's what you get tax credit. You don't pay your taxes on that going forward. So just don't pay your taxes on that amount. You documented that you paid for those furloughed employees who are furloughed and in your employ as of April 2nd. That's what you're doing for that 80-hour period.
Thank you, Brett, for that answer. Another question we've gotten is, and to some degree, the unknown and some worry that people have is, hey, is there going to be any relief for our smallest practices? And in this new federal legislation we see coming down, what is going to be done to help them make sure that in a month or however long this ends up lasting, that they're able to absorb this and still be viable?
It's an excellent question, Ryan. And the issue that has been raised is with respect to smaller employers. So this federal legislation that we've talked about with 2 parts, the sick paid leave for the first 2 weeks, and then an additional up to 10 weeks, 12 weeks total of the child leave, 2/3 rate of pay to take care of children who are at home because schools are closed. There is a small business viability exemption, and we're waiting on the regulations to clarify it. But basically, if because of COVID-19 quarantines and such, the viability of the business, employers under 50, is at risk, they're not sure they're going to survive, then Congress says that there is an exemption process that you can say, I believe my business, my dental practice of fewer than 50 employees, I've only got 5 employees, 3 employees, 10 employees, we can apply for an exemption from the child care leave portion. That's that longer 10-week portion. Any employee who's quarantined, sick, has COVID-19 symptoms and is seeking medical care, you have to pay them the 2-week paid leave portion. Remember, we talked about the act being in 2 parts: the paid sick leave 2-week portion up front, and then the additional 10 weeks after that to care for children who are at home because schools are closed because of this. So the schools at home childcare portion, that may be waived for the smallest employers under the amount of 50 employees. And I understand many of your members, if not most of your members, have fewer than 50 employees. So that's very important. We're going to look for the guidance on that, but there will be a mechanism if you believe the viability of your practice is at risk, that we can't operate if we have to pay 2/3 or $200 a day for 10 more weeks after the paid leave, that could sink our business, that may jeopardize the viability of our practice. Then you can apply for an exemption so that you're not paying that child care leave portion.
Are they already accepting those exemptions?
They haven't even, it's not even in effect yet, right? So it's April 2nd. It's not in effect.
I asked that because I know there will be many lining up for that. I mean, it's the 10 weeks is a long runway.
Yes, it is. And of course, as we now know, because of Governor Northam's order, that school is closed for the rest of the semester. So every one of your members is as employees with children who are school-age children, they're facing this. So there is an exemption. If it jeopardizes the viability of your business, you can apply for it. We're waiting on the guidance.
The Department of Labor indicated this weekend it's working on clear criteria that they will apply to determine if your business will be jeopardized by the small business exemption.
And we will be sure to work with y'all and get that out to our members so they know what those exemptions are and the guidelines. And a lot of this, like you said, we are usually waiting on the Congress passes the bill, but we still need the Department of Labor to interpret and apply the regulations around the bill. So.
And Ryan, just on that point, I think it's important. DOL has made it clear there's going to be no enforcement for the first 30 days because everyone's trying to figure out, how does this work and how am I complying? So I think I should be exempt. I'm a dental practice of fewer than 50 employees. I want that exemption from the partial pay, the 2/3 rent pay for the child care leave for that 10-week period. How do I make sure I'm complying? DOL is not going to be coming knocking on your door for 30 days after April 2nd saying, you're not in compliance, you can't do it that way, you've misinterpreted this viability exemption. So we've got some time to figure it out and do it the right way. I don't want your members to be panicked that, oh my gosh, I'm going to be have to be fined by the Department of Labor because I'm not doing it the right way. Everyone's trying to figure this out together, and that's why we're here. So as we get the information, we'll feed it to you and your members.
Well, thank you so much. It is, I know it has already caused great ease from our members to have this type of information coming at them because they are just searching. You know, it's everybody's going through it, like you said, together. Everybody's figuring it out together. But as we start to get some answers, we want to get it to our members as quickly as possible. And thank you all for making us be able to do that on such an important issue as labor and employment. It really is been 85% of our questions right now have been related to how to take care of their staff and do right by their employees. So, but thank you all again for all of your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.